understand how to become a bankable leader, which we'll talk about what that is in a moment, it's important, I think, to ask the question, are great leaders born or made? For many, many decades, in the 1800s, half of the 1900s, there was a predominant feeling that leadership was born. In other words, you are put on this earth with the capacity to be a great leader or not, right? It's not learnable. But in 1945, at The Ohio State University, which we'll come back to, they really were the first researchers to provide evidence that leadership is learnable. Leadership is learnable, and it actually has nothing to do with your personality. So again, this is a moment at your table to shout out the percentage. What percentage of leadership do you think is learnable? 85? It's very optimistic. Anyone think it's low, like under 30%? All right, that's good. Optimistic crowd. So the answer is actually 70%. 70% of leadership is learnable. What does this mean? What does that mean? A lot of people, I think, whip out statistics and make them up. This is from a real study that was done on the genetic influences on leadership. And what the researchers found was actually 30% of leadership effectiveness was something inborn. You know, you look at people like Martin Luther King Jr. He had something in him that the rest of us don't always have. But the good news is that that 70% of leadership was completely explainable through experience, learning as you go. A lot of people say, you know, my biggest leadership lesson was a failure that I had. We collect these experiences as we go, and if we're smart about it, we can make that learning curve shorter. So, OMG. The Ohio State University study that I talked to you about earlier was really groundbreaking. And I'm going to tell you about it, but I have a caveat to give you. You ready for the caveat? I'm the daughter of a University of Michigan graduate. So for me to stand here and tell you that anything Ohio State University did was groundbreaking is grounds for family dismissal. So as a remedy, I just have to put this up while I tell you. Yay, go blue. Okay, a couple of University of Michigan. So here's what they did. They looked at 70 international harvester foremen, a very interesting population of people, right? And they actually looked at the behaviors that they were showing up with on a daily basis. What were these leaders actually doing? And they did a bunch of very complicated, very boring analyses, and they found at the end of the day that the success of the leaders in this sample was based on two behaviors. Nothing more, nothing less. Here were what they were. The first one is something they called consideration. And this was, are you kind? Are you helpful? It's everything on that left side of the spectrum that we looked at earlier. Are you a friend to your team? Do you create an environment where they can succeed? The second factor they found maps onto the results that we just talked about, and they called it initiating structure. And this was really about, did they set high expectations? Did they hold their employees accountable for reaching those goals and expectations? And here's what I think is really interesting. Remember I said there's a tension between those two things. Do people feel that tension? Every day you're making those choices. Here's what they found. The behaviors were completely independent. What does that mean? It meant that the leaders in the sample could be low on both, in which case you're probably a pretty crappy leader if you're low on both. You could be high on one and low on the other, right? Which most of us, I would argue, are. We have our preferences. But you could also be high on both. You could be high on both. So the tension that most leaders feel is something that the best leaders are able to successfully manage and balance on a daily basis. And again, there's a business reason for this. Leaders that are able to balance the focus on people and a focus on results have the benefit of both outcomes. They get to have it both ways. This was a study that was done at the store Sears in the late 1980s, very famous study. And what the researchers did is they measured each of these things with a lag between them. And the reason they did that is they wanted to see, for example, if employee engagement was actually causing customer satisfaction to go up. And here's what they found. They found that in a particular store at Sears, if they could bump up employee engagement or satisfaction by 5 points, right? So going from 80 to 85% engaged. And that means we're proud to work here, I love coming to work. Customer satisfaction shot up about 1.3%. Not something to sneeze at. Customer satisfaction shot up 1.3%. Here's where it gets really interesting. They then looked at revenue. And they found that on average, revenue increased 0.5%, just by virtue of that 5-point increase in employee engagement. Pretty incredible, right? So employee engagement causes increased revenue. Now, what causes employee engagement? This is not a trick question. Leadership, right? So if you follow that to the very origin, my argument in the work that I do is that leaders are behind the success or the failure of most organizations. Big or small, doesn't matter what industry they're in. But the best leaders get to have it both ways. They get people and results. The rest of what we're going to talk about just in the next few minutes is how can you become more bankable? And really just think about that. What if I could show up every day as a formal or informal leader and focus on both people and results? What would that mean for me? What would that mean if I was in the top 10% of leaders in my organization? What would it mean if all of us were in the top 10%? What would we be capable of? It's really amazing when you think about it. So here's my prescription. 3 things. I am a fan of simplicity because I feel like that is what drives action. So the first thing you need to do, either now, you can sort of talk about this as you're leaving today and networking with your colleagues who hopefully know you. Where do I fall on this continuum? Do I think I'm balanced and I actually am? Do I think I'm balanced and I'm living over at one end or the other and maybe I need to know it? Or am I somewhere in between? And most people are somewhere in between on that spectrum, but do the research. Find out where people see you. The second thing you need to do is exactly what Jane did, which is one behavior at a time. So for example, if I find that I'm just a cool parent leader above all else, and I want to try to focus on some results-based behaviors, maybe I might focus for a month on giving tough feedback as a leader, and just focusing on that. Trying and failing, probably, because that's how we learn. It's uncomfortable, but ultimately becoming better at it. And then introducing something else, like setting aggressive goals. But one thing at a time is how you get there. The third most important item is relentless, deliberate practice. One of the things that we know from research on everybody from grandmasters of chess to concert violinists to even the best radiologists is that ordinary average people can become exceptional through deliberate practice. You hear that, has anybody heard the figure of 10,000 hours from Malcolm Gladwell, right, in Outliers? That's the theory, is to become great at something, you have to spend 10,000 hours. So it's not sexy, unfortunately. I can't come here and give you a silver bullet, but this is how bankable leaders are made, is every day to show up and try that one thing.